Music is incredibly unique. On one hand, it's a collection of sounds playing at the same time at certain frequencies. These things are measurable, right? For some, the reading and writing of music is also very regimented and orderly. There are rules. The sheet music tells you exactly what to do. And from this point of view, music is clearly a science. On the other hand, music tends to bring out emotions better than any other medium. I know every one of you watching has a song or two from your past that you have trouble listening to. Maybe you had a partner and the song reminds you of them. For me, one of those songs is Black Flies by Ben Howard. It just reminds me of my dad, and he passed in 2020, so I have a hard time listening to it. Ultimately, it's undeniable that music is a form of expression for pretty much every culture around the world. And anyone who's ever heard an Itzhak Perlman solo, for example, understands the art form of music. The reason I'm bringing this up is because music, while incredibly expressive, does follow certain rules. And one of those rules is what we call a key signature. This shows the musician what key the song is in. To put it more simply, what scale applies to this song. For example, if a song is in the key of C major, the musician would expect for the notes in the song to correspond with the C major scale unless noted otherwise. So if you're listening to this and you're like, what are chords? What are scales? If you're just beginning to learn, that's what we're going to be learning today. The chords are basically the building blocks of music. So we'll learn what scales are, what chords are, and how they build off of scales. And then I'll tell you about the two most common forms of chords. So let's get to it. All right, so what is a chord? Chord is basically a harmonization of a certain scale. It's a combination of three or more notes in a certain key at its base level. The primary chords of Western music tend to be in two categories, major and minor. So we'll go over both of those. Okay, so for example, a major or minor scale has basically 8 distinct tones and 7 notes, right? You can see here, I've got C major pulled up. These notes are basically numbered based on where they fall within the scale. So, for example, if we're playing a C major scale, we would start with a C, which would be the root note, or the 1, as we'd call it. Yeah, so if we're playing a C major scale, we would start with the C, of course, which would be considered our root note, and that's the foundation on which the chord is built. And then these notes are numbered. So the numbers would be as follows, basically. C, the root note, would be 1. D would be 2. E would be 3, so on and so forth, until you hit 7. And then once you get to the next note, it's another C. That basically counts as the 1 again, because it's the same note as before, it's just an octave higher. So there are 7 distinct notes, and they're numbered as such, just chronologically. Major scales follow a pattern, right? It doesn't matter what note you start with. They're always going to follow the same pattern, and they'll sound the same, just starting with different notes, of course. So for major scales, as you can see here, after the first note, we always go up by a whole step. For example, from C to C sharp would be a half step. The next note is D. That's a whole, so it's basically two semitones up. So from C to D is a whole step, from D to E is a whole step, and then from E to F is a half step, right? And this is where major and minor chords will differ. Of course, we'll go over minor in a minute, but this is the main difference between the two, and this 3 is going to be important for later as well. So just keep that in mind. After the E to F half step, from F to G is a whole step, G to A is a whole step, and A to B is a whole step. And then you have the last half step, to end on C. Okay, so this may sound like a whole lot of like mumbo jumbo to you. So I'm going to pull up a piano here on the screen, so that way you can kind of see what we mean by like half and whole step, because you may not even know all the notes of the scales so far. So I'll pull it up and we'll learn a little bit more. Okay, so now that we've got this little tool open, I'll go into a bit more detail on the whole and half step thing. Okay, so sometimes it's easier to see it and visualize it. So basically when we say half step, that means we go up 1 note on the piano, or on the keyboard. So basically all of the white keys are just the regular notes, C, D, E, F, G. The black keys are, the flats and sharps. So when we go up a half step from C, the note that we have is C sharp. Okay. If we go up a whole step, that means we're going up 2 notes, right? So instead of C to C sharp, we go from C to D. Okay. So that's basically what we mean by whole and half step. Scales, no matter what note you start on, a major scale will always sound like this. almost all major and minor chords are built using triads, which, like I said before, are 3 notes. So I'll teach you how to build a triad as well, because it's really simple, right? So to build a triad, we're going to play the first, the third, and the 5th note in any given scale. So if we're going to play a C major triad, we know that the first note is C. Okay. The third note, like we said before, is E. And the 5th note is G. Okay, so we get to that all too familiar major chord sound. So it's the 1, 3, and the 5. That's as simple as it gets. So to be clear, for C major, the 3 notes are C, E, and G. That's how you build the triad. And this can be done for any key or any scale, just whatever, key signature the song is or whatever chord is needed. So, for example, if we wanted to build a D major chord, in that scale, of course, D is the first note. And then the third note is an F sharp. And the 5th note is an A. So it sounds the same, it's just, a whole step up. So you may have noticed that all of these chords, to this point sound happy, downright cheerful, I'd say. Well, I'm generally a miserable person, so let's take it down a notch. And I do mean literally, right? So I'll tell you the only difference between major and minor triads, the scales are different, which I'll go into that too. But the only difference between the triads are the third note, the 3, is always just down by 1/2 step, right? So what that means is if we're doing C, so say we have C major, just C, E, G, C major triad. For a C minor, we would take this 3 note right here, this E, and we drop it down a 1/2 step. So that would be E flat, right? So instead of E, we're playing E flat, which sounds like this. For minor chords, the vibe is generally more dark, sometimes lonely, sometimes scary. Probably 90% or more of my beats have been in minor keys because I don't tend to operate much in the major sphere. But it's important to learn and know both moving forward because that's only going to help you. The other differences are slight changes to the structure of the scale. For example, I'll list a C major scale on the screen here and a C minor scale. I'll put them side by side so you can kind of see the difference. So for C major, like we said before, go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. For minor scales, it's basically the same set of notes, but there are 3 differences. We know, of course, that the 3 is dropped by 1/2 step, down to E flat in this case. And then the 6 and the 7 are also lowered by a 1/2 step. So it sounds like this. It's definitely a different vibe, right? But those are the only differences between the two. Of course, there are different types of major and minor scales, and I'll go into those in future videos. For the sake of this video, for the sake of brevity as well, that I'll stick to just regular major and minor here. Okay, so let's look at those 2 familiar chords we've been working with, just the C chord and the D, which we touched on briefly. As we know, the major triad sounds like this, C, E, G. Minor triad sounds like this, C, E flat, G. Same goes for the D scale, right? So the major triad is D, F sharp, A. And the minor is D. Instead of F sharp, we go down to F, A. Okay, so D, F, A. So as you could probably imagine, music that's written in a major key is often perceived as happy, positive, uplifting. Like I said, we'll go into that in further videos to look at some of the different options and capabilities of these scales. So that pretty much does it as far as like the basics of major and minor chords, triads. So we will be in the future touching on, like harmonic minor scales, melodic minor scales, and what some of the differences are there. And then we may even go into some more like niche stuff. But I did want to start with some really foundational stuff here so that some of the beginners will be able to follow along. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out in the comments section. I'll be happy to answer any of those that I can get to. If you want to see more of me and my music, feel free to go to my website, which is produced by Vargo.com. If you like the video, leave a like. If you think you'll get some value from the channel moving forward, feel free to subscribe. Otherwise, I appreciate all you guys stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.